This Notebook LM video explores the profound idea of God's love. Divine love is described as eternal, unconditional, and unbreakable. Yet this perfect description collides with the harsh reality of suffering, injustice, and doubt, raising the age-old problem of evil. History itself has often revealed contradictions between the Church's message of love and its actions.
All right, today we're going to tackle a massive, maybe the most powerful and debated idea in all of human history, the love of God. We're going to start with, the perfect ideal. Then we'll dive headfirst into the painful reality that seems to challenge it. And finally, we'll uncover a really surprising history that has shaped how we even think about it today. So let's just jump right in with this. This statement from the Apostle Paul, this isn't just some nice sentiment you'd find on a greeting card. No, it's an absolute declaration. He's basically drawing a line in the sand and saying there is a love so powerful that nothing can break it. It's unshakable. It's unbreakable. This is the absolute peak, the highest possible ideal we're talking about. Okay, so first up, an everlasting love. Let's really explore this foundational idea. God's love as it's laid out in its most perfect, most ideal form. So the first thing to really get your head around here is that this love isn't something you have to earn. That's key. The core idea is that it's totally unconditional. It's not a reward for being good. It's also sacrificial, right? The ultimate price was paid. It's everlasting, meaning it doesn't just fade away. And maybe most importantly, it's foundational. The idea is that we love because He first loved us. It's the source of everything. And check this out. It's so simple, but it's incredibly profound. The text doesn't say that God has love or that He's loving. It says God is love. Think about that for a second. That makes love His very essence, His very being, not just something He does or a quality He has. That is a pretty radical claim when you stop and think about it. In this quote from Jeremiah, it just hammers home that same idea of permanence. The key thing here is that we're not talking about some fleeting emotion, like a crush. No, this is an eternal, constant commitment. It's a faithfulness that's there no matter what we do. This is the gold standard, that perfect ideal of a steadfast love. But, okay, this perfect, beautiful ideal immediately slams into a really difficult, painful question, a reality that, let's be honest, all of us have experienced. So if God is this all-powerful, all-loving being, then why is there so much suffering in the world? This is where the rubber really meets the road. And that right there brings us to the problem of pain. This is where the ideal meets reality, and it's one of the oldest, heaviest challenges to faith that there is. It's a question that has haunted people for centuries. The formal name for this is the problem of evil. And seriously, everyone from ancient philosophers to more modern thinkers like C.S. Lewis has wrestled with this. It's that huge, nagging, but if that just pops into your head whenever you think about a perfectly good God and then look at the world around us. And it's so important to remember this isn't just some abstract philosophical puzzle. No, for most people, it's a deeply personal struggle. It comes from those very real seeds of doubt. The pain of personal trauma, losing someone you love, seeing all the injustice in the world and feeling helpless, or that feeling when you pray and it just feels like you're met with silence. It all boils down to that universal question, why do bad things happen to good people? This is a doubt that is born from real-life experience. And this tension between a good God and a suffering world, well, people have been wrestling with it throughout history. And some of the solutions they came up with were, they were pretty wild. So, let's jump in our time machine and go way back to the 2nd century. There was this one Christian thinker who came up with a really shocking, really radical solution to this whole problem. Okay, so this guy, Marcion of Sinope. He looks at all the flaws in the world, right? And he reads some of the harsher parts of the Old Testament, and he just goes, you know what? This doesn't add up. He decided there couldn't be just one God. He argued there had to be two of them. On one hand, you have this legalistic, kind of wrathful creator God who made our messed up material world. And then, completely separate, you have this other, higher God of pure love and mercy who sent Jesus to save us from that other God's creation. Well, as you can imagine, the early church leaders were absolutely horrified. They kicked Marcion out, called his idea heresy, and fiercely rejected this whole two gods theory. They doubled down and established the core Christian belief that has stuck around for 2,000 years. There is only one God, and somehow this single God is a perfect blend of both justice and mercy. But that leads to another really tough question. What happens when the actions of an institution seem to completely contradict its own message of love? This forces us to look at a whole other layer of this challenge. Not just philosophy, not just theology, but the messy and, let's be honest, often brutal history of the institution itself. Which brings us to the birth of something called theophobia, a legacy of fear. Let's dig into this argument that history didn't just fail to solve the problem, it actually helped create fear around the whole idea of God. So what is theophobia? It's really important to get this right. We're not talking about atheism or just disagreeing with religion. This is a specific phobia, an intense, persistent, sometimes debilitating fear of God. And the reason this is so key is because it's usually rooted not in some philosophical argument, but in really negative or even traumatic religious experiences. So how did we get from a message of love to a phobia of fear? Well, look at this timeline. After the church shut down ideas like Marcion's and started to formalize its power at councils like Nicaea, its whole relationship with worldly power, it shifted. And over the next 1,000+ years, that power was used to enforce its beliefs in some pretty brutal ways. We're talking about things like the Albigensian Crusade, which was basically a genocide, all the way to the infamous inquisitions. And this is where a really profound irony kicks in. Some thinkers argue that the Orthodox Church, in its mission to stamp out any idea of a harsh, judgmental creator God, paradoxically started acting like one. In trying to enforce its vision of love, it ended up creating the very fear it was supposed to drive out. And what you get is this profound contradiction, a deep historical disconnect that honestly, we still feel the echoes of today. It's this massive tension between a message of a loving God and a history where that very name was used to justify violence, persecution, and control. So, where does all this leave us? Well, it's definitely not with a simple, neat answer. What we're left with is this profound and enduring tension, this space between, that really sits at the very heart of this whole conversation.
When you boil it all down, this is the central conflict, right? On one side, you've got this beautiful, powerful ideal of a perfect, unconditional love. It's an idea that offers so much hope and comfort. But on the other side, you've got the hard reality of a world filled with suffering, and you have a historical legacy where faith itself was sometimes used to inflict incredible pain.
But here's a thought. What if this struggle to reconcile these things isn't a sign that faith has failed? What if it's not a bug, but a feature? For a lot of people, both believers and philosophers, the struggle to hold these competing ideas in your mind at the same time, well, that is the conversation. That's the whole point. So it all comes back to this. Just one single, incredibly complex idea, God's love. And it's been facing thousands of years of the hardest questions imaginable. It's an idea that somehow has to hold both the promise of perfect love and the reality of so much pain. And so the final question we're left with is this. Is that gap, that space between the loving ideal and the painful reality, is it a failure of faith, a contradiction that just breaks the whole thing apart, or is learning to live right there, in that uncomfortable gap, the very essence of what faith is all about? That's the thought we want to leave you with today.